Yes. So hi, everybody. Welcome to Authentication at MIT. So my name is Squee. This is Gabriel. So the purpose of our presentation is that we see that MIT, a lot of times students are trying to create websites for other people to use. And a lot of times one of the pain points is trying to create something that people can authenticate to because easily, and you don't want people creating their own username and password for your websites. So we just created a short class giving examples of what you can use at MIT.
Yep. So we're just gonna give the overview like what is available here. Just like a little bit of history. So yeah, that's basically implementing authentication usually requires making it secure. So it's hard to do by yourself. And even if you do it by yourself, it's possible that you forgot to follow some best practice. You have to add salt and pepper to your passwords. It's not a joke. That's how they're called. And yeah, why do you want authentication on your website? Because you want to know who people are. You want to be able to let them post as themselves, for example. So these are the choices we're going to go through, kind of by age, but not exactly. So we have certs. You've probably used a website that use certs. You might have used a website that use Kerberos or Web Athena directly. SAML is Touchstone, and OIDC is one of the newer protocols. This is an example of a website which has both of the first ones we're going to mention. If you go to xvm.mit.edu, that's SIPB's virtual machine service. Since it's older, if you open incognito, xvm, it's going to ask you for a certificate, and you click OK, and then it authenticates you. So we have certs.
Yeah. So generally, with a lot of kind of encryption or cryptography systems in the real world, a lot of times you have something called a public key and a private key, and these are kind of two mathematical entities that are related to each other. So you can use usually the public key to encrypt something, and then use your private key to decrypt it. And the details of it is not too terribly important, but the idea of here in our case is that these keys can be used to create a certificate. Most importantly, the certificate is something that a trusted authority like the MIT, a CA server, it says that, okay, this is the user's public key, and I have registered this user before, and I trust it. And this certificate can then later be used in the future whenever you need to talk to the MIT services you kind of present the certificate saying, here, this is information about me. And because you put your rubber stamp on it before, you can trust this information. Next. And yeah, so there's a process of how these keys are generated and how it actually gets you registered with MIT. But for our case, the important part is that you can just go to cea.mit.edu to download your own certificate. I'm sure everybody in this room pretty much done it. If you don't, then this is the website. And when you have this client certificate, this is when you can use things like what we did with XVM. You can go to the website, hand in the certificate, and your browser would do kind of a key exchange to authenticate you to that website.
So scripts.mit.edu is MIT SIP-based hosting service. So we can use it to write websites. So SIP Project DB is an example that's and it's actually just one line. We just have to get a specific environment variable to get the email. And as long as the users connect with the port 444, this line is all you need to get a certificate, to know who the person's email is.
Let's take a few steps back. So have you guys used scripts before? Okay, sure. I guess we'll give just a brief introduction. So right, both of us are members of SIPB, the Student Information Processing Board. And it's just a CS club that runs services like Hydrant, CourseRoad that you guys probably used before. And so as part of SIPB, one of our big projects is something called Scripts. It's a slightly older project, but it's meant to be an easy way for you to be able to have your own website. And usually it's display more, I guess static information, but there's also a database that we provide that you can store information into. And the nice things about scripts is that for example, when SIPB, when we were creating our own database to keep track of the projects that we're working on. You can see that if you go to here, SIPB/projectDB is hosted on scripts.mit.edu. And we run our websites based on like Python scripts. There's a library called Jinja, not too terribly important. But the nice part is that with scripts, you can do like a :444. And the nice thing about that is when you click on like, you can direct it, it will ask you for your certificate and it will sign you in. It's a similar process to what we did earlier with xvm.mit.edu. And so what Gabriel was just explaining was that like under the hood, you can, when you authenticate successfully, it will just be in like an environmental variable that you can access from your script, and it will give you the identity of the user who just logged in, which is usually their email. Does that make sense so far? Anything? Yep.
444.
Yeah.
So websites or like any kind of service over the internet needs they're like sort of like channels, sort of like if you have like a road, say that you have different lanes, so that you may be able to connect to a website like via, one of them is like SSH on the dial-ups, Athena dial-up.mit.edu. This would use a certain port, which is 22. The detail is not particularly important. Some websites are older, such as student.mit.edu, used to have this issue where a lot of people were getting not found errors because for some reason it was on HTTP. And because of the way they implemented, they were hosting specific different versions depending on what it is. So HTTP uses port 80. Again, it's not important to remember, but it uses a different port. And HTTPS uses port 443. HTTP, I don't know what it stands for, but it's a web protocol, and HTTPS, the S stands for secure. So like what would happen if instead of HTTPS, we kept the 444, but changed to HTTP? It's going to complain saying that you're speaking plain HTTP to an SSL-enabled server port. Should be just a convention so that like both the website creator and the users can know that they are using a cert, and so that you're not asked for a cert when the website doesn't want it. So the website can direct you to 444 only when they want you to authenticate.
But yeah, so the main point of this entire part was that like, so certificates has been kind of a long way that you can, authenticate things like student.mit.edu. It's becoming increasingly less frequently used just because the certificate, you have to have it installed on the device that you want to like log in on. And yeah, so we're just showing you that with scripts, this is one way that you can authenticate your user.
So first, to get the details, we would get these environment variables. So the email is an environment variable called SSL client SDN email. And the name is also stored in your cert, which is CN, means common name, I think, yeah. And then to check whether someone is in a particular group or something, it will be up to you to implement it. Scripts has also HT access, which is one possible way to implement it because they run Apache, but I think the details of how to do that are beyond this clue dump. But
oh yeah, and if at any point you guys like, well, feel free to raise your hand during the but if you're like, okay, I want, I heard what you said about scripts, but I kind of wanted to understand the implementation details, like feel free to email us after the fact. We have a Google form we'll share with you at the end where you can sign up so that we can share you with all the materials we have today.
Yeah. So if you search on the web, how can I authenticate people using MIT certificates on scripts, you will find depending on what you need, maybe you just want to lock your website, maybe it's just a static website. So you can just follow these instructions so that your static website lets you asks for a cert and only lets people use them if they have a valid cert. And this would check that they are in a specific mailing list, but it needs to be marked as an AFS group. So you need to go to webmora.mit.edu, your mailing list, you need to make sure it says AFS group, otherwise it wouldn't work. So that's for static websites. And if you have a dynamic website and you want to know who the person is and return different output depending on who the person is, that's where you would use the environment variables. And this is also what they're explaining, except they use like Django and PHP as examples, or Perl, because scripts is a little older, but you can still use more modern technologies. And it will be the same code, just getting an environment variable. We're going to move on to the other authentication protocols that there are. So Kerberos is a three-headed dog that guards Hades. And that's why Kerberos is named Kerberos. So it was created in 1988 for Project Athena, which is still in use today. Now it's mostly just dial-ups, but it used to be the computers in the clusters. You were able to go to like building 66 or in the stud 5. There used to be clusters way before my time. And it uses symmetric key cryptography. So unlike the other type of cert, that's like public key, private key, that's asymmetric. This one is symmetric. Don't know how it works under the hood. That would be for the cryptographers to decide. So Web Athena is an example of how to use Kerberos. So if we run the knet command, I could demo on my laptop. I don't know if we have time. We have time. I can share screen.
Sure. But yeah, so nowadays when you guys like log into dial-up or something, you enter like your Kerberos and your password. You're really interfacing with the Kerberos system, and usually the idea is like they issue tickets that you hold on to, and then you can use those tickets to get access to things. And the main part is that we're not really. So like certificates and Kerberos, these are things that were created, like a long time ago, and are less commonly used in like the front interface today. But we're going to show off like Web Athena, which is something that interfaces with Kerberos and is meant for more web applications.
Yeah, so Kerberos has some commands that you also they're not like for you like to memorize unless you need them. But klist would list all the Kerberos tickets. I don't know how I can zoom out. So they have specific expiration dates. So the way Kerberos works is that you give the site, there's like an authoritative domain, Athena MIT.edu, and there's some kind of service that grants you a ticket. In order to get a ticket, one way is by running the knet command, and you give it your username. So it knows what my username is, but otherwise I would need to tell it what my username is and what the realm is. A lot of setups have our domain as default, even though if it's not for MIT. So people at other universities might need to change from whatever Athena to their own domain. So now if we do klist, I have only one ticket, but as I use more services, the ticket granting ticket will give me more tickets. So I can say like Blanche. This is a command to check the mailing list. Instead of having to use WebMoira, you can use this command. And if you want to see, for example, all the websites running on scripts, there's a long list of websites running on scripts, and I can query them from my computer without having to log into the dial-ups because I have Kerberos on my computer. If you log into the dial-ups, whenever you give it your password, it's going to do this under the hood. It's going to run the equivalent of knet. So now if I run klist, I can see that I have another ticket for a different service principal, which would be Moira. And that's because I was able to run the command because I compiled the Moira commands myself. But you can, if you want to do that, just talk to me. So another way of using Moira, if you're using a browser instead, it's, let's say, I'm in the matrix.mit.edu/classes website. I have a button that's import from Web Athena. So this is going to do the same. Some time ago, I think it was around, here's 2013, David Bin wrote a thesis that was implementing this thing, but in JavaScript. And if you look at the thesis, it has a bunch of comments saying like, why are you doing this to yourself? But it has the explanation. So Web Athena is a browser implementation of Kerberos and explains what Kerberos is. So it's a way for users and services to prove their identities to each other. And one of the things it has that more modern protocols don't have is that you can prove your identity over an insecure network. The need for this is less than before, but Kerberos is still in use by Microsoft for their Active Directory and other things. So it's still relevant in some way. And this way, if you authenticate, so my site, matrix.mit.edu/classes, they're not going to get your password because this JavaScript thing sends your password and gets a ticket and is going to send the ticket back to the website. So the website doesn't actually know your password, and it will get a ticket that works only on Moira. It wouldn't get the full ticket. So it would only get this ticket. It wouldn't get this one, because this is a ticket that lets you get all other tickets. So once I renew my login, also, if you want to implement this on your own website or backend, also talk to me because the details are, I can send you docs. So it was able to know what classes I am pre-registered for because it read it from using my Moira ticket on what mailing lists I am in. So now I'm going to stop sharing screen.
Thanks.
I think the slides are just, yeah, MIT. So next we can go to one of the newer protocols. That's, when was SAML invented? It's, bro, don't ask me. So it's kind of a corporate. So SAML stands for Security Assertion Markup Language, and they're at version 2. So there are some concepts like the service provider is your application. So if you're a web developer, you can write your own service provider. If you just use other people's websites, then the websites you use are service providers. And the identity provider is MIT Touchstone. So for short, this is SP and IDP. Those are the abbreviations that they would use. So if you want to contact Touchstone support and ask them for help, they might give you these abbreviations and assume you know what they are. So it's good to look them up if you do want to implement Touchstone from scratch, but you don't have to implement it from scratch, which is what we're going to show you on the main purpose of this talk. So SAML, instead of using JavaScript and JSON, so if you're familiar with them, for example, in something like WebLab or any other web development, you would know that more modern websites use JSON and they use REST APIs, but SAML is older and they use XML and SOAP APIs. So implementing by yourself would probably be painful, but thankfully there's a lot of libraries that let you do it. So you don't have to re-implement SAML.
Yeah. To explain the terms a little bit more, so like MIT Touchstone, right, is kind of meant to be this kind of centralized authentication platform that MIT uses. And SAML, if I'm correct, right, it's like one way to interface with Touchstone.
Yeah.
It's just a common like language to, this is how you transfer information between different parties. So your web application and the MIT Touchstone platform.
So it also uses certificates like asymmetric cryptography under the hood. We have a diagram of how it works. So I don't know if we're going to go through this, but okay. So we have a user agent, a service provider, and identity provider. So your user agent will be like your laptop, your phone. So you request something, and first you want to know what the identity provider is, because there may be more than one of them. In the case of MIT, there's IDP to MIT.edu is Touchstone, but there's also like Touchstone for alums. If you've used some websites, they might ask you, do you want to use Touchstone? Do you want to use the alumni thing, or do you want to use the whatever other thing it has? So that's when you can choose an IDP. So then once you discover what IDP to use, you will be redirected to a website. So you will be taken to a website to put in your curb. So we can go to Touchstone tester by MIT.edu. So let's say you want to log in, you click login on a website. So that's, yeah, you're redirected. And you can see here that it has the option to use tickets, except most computers might not have tickets. If you use one of the still remaining but very few public computers that are at MIT, once you log in with your curb, if you open the browser, you would see that this button works. But you need to knet and do all of those things in order for this button to work, so it's not that practical anymore. So that's the part. So once you log in, authenticate with cert, it's going to ask you for two-factor authentication, and then you're going to have the authentication completed. So that's the rest. So the identity provider, blah, 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 it knows who you are, it returns a form, and then
you can get information about the user if you need it.
It will get information about you, yeah. So we could show the developer tools, but I feel like it will be a little bit unnecessary. But we can see that it's going to send them somehow. So to set up Touchstone, if you look it up, how to set up Touchstone, you will find these provisioning steps, which you could follow, but we're going to show you another way. So Shibboleth provides MIT's. So MIT's identity provider, so Touchstone is actually Shibboleth under the hood. So Shibboleth is just like one possible implementation. It's not their website. Anyway, there's another guide on how to use SAML directly. This one was published with the MIT libraries, and they like tell you what SAML is, and they tell you how to use SAML more directly than having to use this Shibboleth thing that ISNT wants you to use. Touchstone support, MIT EU. If you were to write your own website and wanted to add Touchstone authentication to it directly, you would contact them, and they're very good at responding with your questions. So you don't need to like bang your head against the wall. You can just ask them. We have a config file. Most libraries or products that use SAML are going to ask you to configure a bunch of stuff. All of this you can get by contacting Touchstone support. They can help you with setting this config file, but it has keys and certs, which are like private keys and public keys. So there's like 4 of them. How to generate it is using their provisioning guide. There is, you specify some details. Touchstone doesn't actually use these, but you can have a contact email. This is at least for ISNT to know who to contact. And there's some metadata. Like I had mentioned, I used XML and not JavaScript. Like if I view the source, we can see. I'm going to use to type on this keyboard. We can see that the server has its own certificates as well, and it has a bunch of stuff. Like there's IDP staging, there's the URLs for a bunch of stuff, like where you would be redirected, where your service would contact. So the thing is, you don't have to know what any of these is, because when you give it to a library, the library is going to consume this and it's going to know what to do. What else?
Yeah, well, it's okay. So the main thing with SAML is, right, it's a very commonly used framework / language nowadays. And so a lot of times, depending on like what your website needs are, right? So people like, if you're using Python to create your website or the backend of it, then there's a PySAML library. And oftentimes the main thing you have to do is just to edit these configurations, saying, use this MIT's IDP server. I want to fetch these specific information about a user. These are my endpoints. And so it would depend. There's many libraries you can use to do that. So, the MIT library guide is a great way to get started to see like, what are some recommended things. Yeah.
So we have, this is Bedrock's configuration. So we will tell you what Bedrock is in a bit. SAML also has universal resource name. What's the word it has? Yeah, universal resource name. And they're like kind of standardized. It's also like, it still gives off like, this is very enterprisey kind of vibe that may not be the most pleasant to work with. So you might need to set up somewhere in your backend that whatever this means this, that this random thing means this. And I've seen at least one code base that just uses these strings directly instead of using display name, which don't do that. But so there's other ones like some MIT specific ones, which we're using to get the first name and last name separately. But overall, so that's how SAML works, or at least not how it works, but like a little bit a deeper dive into it without diving way too deeply because we don't know SAML enough.
Yeah. Wait, okay, sorry, I just want to take a moment. So originally the last part is going to be OIDC, which is kind of what we recommend or like what we found to be the most helpful when trying to, I guess, develop our websites at this point. But I just want to take a question. Anybody have any questions or like, I didn't really understand this section. Okay. Yeah, and so to also give like a kind of a brief overview so far. So far we've seen certificates, we've seen Kerberos, and then SAML. So certificates, Kerberos are two older methods. We said that with certificates, you can go to scripts, or a project made by SIPB to create a website. That's a nice like 444 redirect you can use. I think there's also libraries that you can do to authenticate as a given certificate. I'm not entirely sure on that. Kerberos, MIT is always like you give your Kerb and your password. That's how you log in. And it's usually meant for, originally meant for authenticating to like computers at the college workstation. But something like Web Athena does give you that option to use tickets to get information about a user to log them in. SAML, there are a lot of different libraries that you can use. The nice thing about that is it talks to Touchstone, which gives you the option to do certificates, to do Kerberos, or just to do your username and password. And there's a lot of different libraries, but it gets you to that familiar login page that all of us have used every day.
So up until now, you needed to use SAML in order if you wanted to write a website and you wanted it to have a Touchstone authentication in it, you needed to use any sort of SAML service provider, which would be any JavaScript or Python or whatever using a library. You would have to find a SAML library, then we have to email Touchstone support and just have a really long email chain until you have a finally working authentication. But now we have Bedrock.
Yep. Okay, so raise of hand who's heard of OAuth before? Awesome. Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know the exact details myself, but OAuth isn't meant to be kind of a easy way for you to link your identity on Google platforms like your Gmail account or your Google account or Facebook, and then have it talk to third-party applications. Because you have those buttons that says sign into your Google account or sign into your Facebook account, and it makes it easy because you can use one popular platform and on many different services, and they'll just get exactly what they need about your profile to create a user and manage to identify you as a user on the website. Well, so OpenID Connect is based off of OAuth. Now, OAuth, I think originally was designed for like access to data, but it doesn't actually do authentication. So OIDC, for short, extends that framework. The whole process is that like you click a button on the third-party website, which is in this case like the student website that you're creating. It will redirect you to the MIT Touchstone login page. It'll get back some result to your application. And using that, you can then query information about the user and be like, oh, this is the person email who just logged in. So with OIDC, they communicate using something called JSON Web Tokens. This is kind of like the decoded form. So like once I probably logged in, I'll get something, well, I, meaning my browser, get something back that looks like this. It'll be like, this is the identity is this person's email and some information about, when this identity token expires. But the more important part is it gives you an access token, which says like, okay, you are authorizing this website to get information about you, and then using your website can like go and query, okay, what is this person's email? What is their name? And using this token, it can actually get that at that information. So I think the details of this whole flow is going to look pretty similar to what we saw before. You get redirected, You get back some authentication code that you use to get an access token and an ID token. And using the access token, you can get information about the user. The nice part, so for us within SIPB, what we've been doing is we created a server that allows you to talk using this OIDC protocol. Previously, there used to be a website called oidc.mit.edu. Have you guys ever heard of it before? Cool. It was kind of built, I think, by MITRE as collaboration, and lasted about 7 years or so. Had a lot of different like MIT websites, like courses and even student websites using it. But it was decommissioned towards the end of this past year. And so until that point, we felt like, okay, we didn't need to be a replacement. So we ended up creating something called petrock.mit.edu. Do you want to show the website? So I think at some point we saw just on the ICT website, they were like the server went down. We don't know why. Before that, we were trying to use it, and I spent a whole semester like writing a client for it, and if 2 people try to authenticate at the same time, it will just.
It was always very slow, and I guess at some point IS&T kind of gave up on it instead of fixing it.
But now, so we were talking about a SAML, right? And so we were like, oh, yeah, this entire website's run off of this. Now, if we get more people, this is proven to be workable so far. It's, it suffices. But as more people join, sign up for this project or so, we can upgrade it to like a more
dedicated server.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we've written some instructions on like how to use it, what is Bedrock, who is it for, how do you start. For now, if you want to get in order to use it, you have to get the client ID and secret. So you get it by either filling out a form and then we will email it to you, or you can email us directly at pedrock@mit.edu. So we can show Dorm Digest as an example.
Yes.
Of a website that uses Bedrock. So I can sign out, and then I can also. Yeah.
And under the hood, so the Bedrock server really converts SAML, which is what we've been talking about when we said like configurations are kind of hard, to OIDC protocol. So you don't have to worry about that whole kind of weird looking config file. So and it can it redirects you to the same place that you normally do for MIT Touchstone. You can probably
so this is what I showed. Like there was like a choose the IDP. Like there's a bunch. There's a Touchstone collaboration. There's an MIT alumni account. We decided to support at least both Kerberos and alumni accounts. But if you wanted to like disallow alumni from logging into your website, you could just check that the email ends in at MIT.edu instead of alum.mit.edu. So you can like remember, continue.
Yep.
So yeah, and we can see you get a code, and you get an ID token, an email, and a session ID. And then the backend can validate this directly with the backend. So the backend of Dorm Digest can check with Bedrock that this ID token is good by checking like the signature and other cryptographic stuff. I don't know.
Oh yeah, I can tell.
I guess, but I don't know. Probably don't need that.
So yeah, so this that showcases like a client that we wrote, and also just using the Bedrock server. So yeah, this is like what I built off of Dorm Digest was like from this. This is also a project that I was working on, and so this is just like if you go to this repo, you can set up a client that looks like this. And I made it, because I took WebLab, I wanted to make it easy for people like who are using React. So we're using React in the front end and then like Express on the back end. And the reason why we have a front end and the back end is because for it to like be actually secure, you need to store a client secret, and you can't really do that on like the front end because every user who uses your website will see that. But yeah, so the intention for us when we made this repo was like trying to make it as easy as possible. We provide a lot of information here, but we provide like, okay, npm install, go fill out the form, and you should be able to, update these important bits inside the configs. So the config for us, instead of, kind of the scary strings we were looking at for SAML, all you need to do is, now, what is, well, I guess Bedrock, what is the domain name of your website, right? And then everything else is kind of predefined for in terms of the paths on your websites. So it's really just like these two parts, and then updating your client ID and client secret. So it's just a few small configuration changes. There are things like, if you wanted to implement sessions, IDs, and session tokens or cookies on your website, then like that's kind of a design choice that like you make. But in terms of what you need to configure for our website, that's pretty much those 4 things. So yeah, so this repo went into creating this website, which is also used in Dorm Digest, the same code base. Yeah. But you don't have to. Go ahead. I think right now there's about like 8 projects. There's been a few from CSAIL, interestingly enough, because I say interestingly.
6031 or 6046.
And there was like an AI for EE project. Oh, and the motivation for why we went on OIDC, right? Because you're like, well, there's a defunct ISNT service, and now you guys have your own client and your own server. Like, why should I trust you guys there? Well, so one thing is ISNT is also committed to continue to have OIDC support in the future. I don't think we can exactly say, but they're like changing their system a little bit. But they say like OIDC protocol support will continue.
At some point, maybe during IFE, maybe during the spring, maybe later, they would replace Touchstone with something that would support OIDC directly.
Yeah. And the protocols would be like the same. And so there are also open libraries that you can use if you don't prefer not to use the client that we provided. Then you also make the similar configuration changes. It's nice because it's really meant, OIDC is used in like Gmail or like a lot of common websites nowadays as well. And I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. But yeah, there's I know people have used like if you Next.js, I think another project called like Dorm Soup that MIT did use, they built theirs off of like a Next.js OIDC I think library, something like that. Yeah. No, I don't think
they use Touchstone directly, right?
Yes. Oh, at some point they were using OIDC.MIT.edu, but then they were like, it's too slow. So, yep. Yep. But yeah, I think that's kind of marked about all of the 4 options we wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
What you want to add?
No, just like if people have questions about anything.
And then we also have a Google form. So if you wanted to get like like the recording of this, or just the material sent over free.
It might be obstructed.